Professeur d'histoire et d'études religieuses à l'Université d'État de Pennsylvanie. Ayant étudié les premiers textes juridiques musulmans, il est l'auteur ou l'éditeur de plusieurs livres, dont Early Maliki Law, The Cambridge Companion to Muhammad et Muhammad's Heirs, The Rise of Muslim Scholarly Community. Docteur professeur Jonathan va nous parler de l'histoire et importance de la collecte de manuscrits de Kairouan en Tunisie. Professeur, si vous m'entendez bien, vous avez la parole pour 25 minutes. Et il est 11h53, donc nous pouvons dire jusqu'à 12h20. Vous avez la parole. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, chers amis et collègues. And thank you to all the organizers of this terrific conference. I'm going to share my screen here. And hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, we see.
So again, thank you especially to the Islamic Manuscript Association and to the Alexandrian Library for putting on this conference, to Madame Dalia and her team, and also to the language interpreters. We very much appreciate your work. I'm delighted to be here to speak about one of the important collections in Africa. As it has been said, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa are very much closely tied, and we will see many of those connections, I think, today, and with both my presentation and that of Professor Shawki. There's a lot to do in terms of future research, but we see many connections already. So as everyone in this conference knows, Kairouan, Tunisia is one of the oldest Islamic cities in the world, the capital of the province of Ifriqiya, founded in 670, the Common Era, by Uqba ibn Nafi', and quickly grew in size and stature. When Baghdad was built, Kairouan was already home to an important group of scholars of Islamic law, theology, Quranic, and other fields. By the time Cairo was established, Kairouan was attracting students from as far away as Iraq and Spain. The collection of manuscripts located in the National Laboratory for the Preservation and Conservation of Parchment and Manuscripts in Kairouan is the legacy of this scholarly activity. Outside of Tunisia, however, few know of the existence of this collection, and if they do, it's because of the pages of this famous Blue Quran that has been taken apart and sold to important museums throughout the world. In contrast, fragments of other Quran manuscripts in the Kairouan collection have worn pages and student remarks on them. This is even more the case with legal manuscripts in the collection, which often include corrections and marginal notes, collation remarks, in addition to dated auditions, sama' remarks. These fragments are hard to read and even harder to appreciate, but they point to a very different history of this collection than a mere storehouse for expensive Qurans. Our first modern description of the collection derives from Mohammed Bey Bayram, a Tunisian dignitary who gave a talk in Cairo in French, which was later translated into Arabic and published in Al-Muqtataf, a leading Arabic literary journal, in 1897. Bayram traveled to Kairouan in September of 1896 by horse-drawn tramway and found the manuscripts in a space in the front of the mosque, enclosed by a tall wooden screen known as a maksura, and that you see here to the bottom left. The maksura was a controversial construction meant to shield the local ruler from the masses, providing both security and privacy. Bayram describes what he calls a second maksura, which is actually these rooms here you can see to the right of the mihrab in this schematic. And this was part of the connection between the mosque and the Dar al-Imara. In this second Maqsura, as he calls it, there were artifacts from Kairouan's history strewn on the ground and 2 cabinets. These cabinets were full of manuscript pages, as he says, gathered in bundles without order or organization. The large with the small with the large, a page from this Quran and a page from that one, along with pages from other books in various places and so forth, all covered by thick dust and spider webs. Byram's report on this collection spurred the Protectorate into action, and a team soon set to work organizing the manuscripts. While some pages of the Blue Quran may have found their way into Ottoman and European hands at this time, the collection as a whole remained largely intact. The best general history of the Kairouan Library, written by Venno Schwartz in 1986, suggests that the Quran manuscripts were the first to be collected in the Great Mosque, with the manuscripts on other subjects added later. In making this claim, Schwartz pulls together 2 lines of evidence. First, that the Qurans in the mosque were for study and devotional reading. In comparison, we know that Kairouan also had a Dar al-Hikmah, where they were teaching astronomy and philosophy and natural sciences. The study of Islamic law and history took place in scholars' homes. And so this concept of the Quran being uniquely attached to the mosque is what Schwartz is arguing. His second line of argument is based on the physical evidence of endowment remarks on Qurans. And some of these on early Qurans in the mosque state that they were explicitly donated to the mosque for the purposes of study. However, legal manuscripts also must have been part of the collection from a very early date. Today, if we look at manuscripts that we can date through Samat remarks and Waqf and other remarks, 23 legal manuscripts can be dated to the 3rd century Hijri, while only 1 Quran fragment can be securely dated to this period. These and other manuscripts were clearly studied and commented upon for generations until the collection fell into disuse in the 6th century Hijri. The relative neglect of these manuscripts that so bothered Muhammad Bey Bayram in the 19th century is part of the reason that the collection remained virtually frozen in time, leaving one of the oldest intact collections of Arabic manuscripts in the world. They are like artifacts in situ, providing us much more information about the texts they preserve and the community that produced them than any individual manuscript could on its own. This is quite in contrast to Arabic manuscripts found today, for example, in Europe and in North America. To the best of our knowledge, the collection appears to comprise more than 40,000 disbound leaves from Quran manuscripts, both parchment and paper. It has more than 2,500 disbound leaves from non-Quranic manuscripts, primarily on parchment, some 170 loose manuscript bindings, about 2,200 paper manuscript codices, and some papyri that were added to the collection in the 20th century. To understand how the unique nature of the collection can aid research, I want to survey the surviving texts surrounding one well-represented scholar, Sahnun ibn Sa'id, a paragon of the Maliki school of Islamic law, which today is so firmly a part of the identity of North and West African Islam. Sahnun's famous book, the Mudawana, was considered second in importance only to Malik's Muwatta. As one would expect, Sahnun is well represented in the Kairouan collection, including hundreds of folios of his Mudawana. Because the collection remains uncatalogued, it is impossible to give a complete overview of the manuscripts associated with them. In this paper, I'm going to focus only on those manuscripts that we know were dated before 300 of the Hijri, that is within 60 years of Sahnun's death. I do not need to emphasize to this audience just how extraordinary it is to have so many manuscripts that can be firmly dated to within a single generation of a man who died in 240. Altogether, we have 7 fragments of Sahnun's own text dated to 300 or earlier, several texts from previous generations of scholars which Sahnun transmitted, and also texts from Sahnun's students, giving us a very well-rounded depiction of his scholarly activity. The oldest dated fragments in the Kairouan collection are from Sahnun's Mudawwana, the earliest of which is a single folio written before 235 of the Hijri, that is 5 years before Sahnun's death. And at the very bottom, you can perhaps just make out Sam'atuhu min Sahnun, and that's, you can't see that quite clearly, but and وَسَمِعَهُ Sa'id ibn Muhammad ibn Rashid. And then at the bottom, even harder to make out, is the actual, again, a secondary remark that says this was heard by Sahnun in the year 235. The next 2 oldest Mudawwana fragments are colophons. One is 17, dated by colophons. One is 17 folios long, written by Zaidain ibn Ismail in Rajab of 256. Like many early Kairouan manuscripts, the margins follow the natural shape of the animal skin to maximize the use of space. The next fragment was written by Ahmed ibn Budar in 258 and is 8 folios long. And then the great scholar of these manuscripts from Germany, Miklos Murani, mentions having seen 2 more dated manuscripts of Sahnun's Mudawwana with readers' remarks from 279 and 294. There are many, many more such manuscripts and much more research to be done on these, but this is what we have seen so far. In addition, we have 2 fragments of Sahnun's Mukhtalata. This first an 8 folio fragment that must have been written before 282 in Kairouan, and 2 folios from the Kitab al-Hajj from the Mukhtalata, who heard, a scholar who heard it in 284. The precise relationship of the Mudawwana and the Mukhtalata has been discussed at length by scholars and is frankly very difficult to ascertain from these short fragments. Again, with the hundreds and hundreds of folios we have of Sahnun's writings, we might be able to further understand the compilation history of these 2 texts. The Kairouan collection also contains texts that appear to have been part of Sahnun's personal library. These are fragments from the previous generation, many of which have no other known manuscript witnesses. For example, we find legal writings by Abdulaziz ibn Abdullah ibn Abi Salama al-Majishun, who died in 164. He was a contemporary of Malik ibn Anas, who also taught in Medina. This manuscript was written down by Abdul Jabbar ibn Khalid ibn Imran Sulti, who died in 281, who transmitted it from Sahnun and taught it in 275. So we have all the information in a remark in the margins of the manuscript. We also have a 9 folio fragment of the Muwatta by Malik ibn Anas, written before 288. This is the oldest dated manuscript of this famous text. The transmission is from Malik to Ali ibn Ziyad, to Musa ibn Muawiyah. The date of 288 is derived again from a Samat remark, so the manuscript may in fact be older than that, but that provides us with a closing date for this manuscript. Murani speculates that it was actually written within Sahnun's lifetime. Sahnun's student, Yahya ibn Amr al-Kinani, is mentioned in the Samat remark from Shawwal 262 on a manuscript of a collection of hadith attributed to another contemporary of Malik ibn Anas, Sufyan ibn Uyayna. Once again, the Kairouan collection holds our earliest witness to the works of this key scholar. This single bifolio on parchment is heavily damaged with many Samat remarks that testify to its heavy use. This is an especially important text because hadith collections are poorly represented in Kairouan. Miklos Morani has devoted many articles, volumes, and editions to his study of the Egyptian scholar Abdullah ibn Wahb. 3 of the Kairouan manuscripts from the scholar are dated to before 300 of the Hijri and were transmitted by Sahnun, allowing for direct comparison with texts that serve as primary sources for his Madawana. In other words, Sahnun quotes Malik, he quotes Abdullah ibn Wahb in his own text, and we can compare what he writes in the Madawana with what he transmitted from these scholars directly. The first is a 22 folio fragment of the Kitab al-Qada fi al-Buyu' from Ibn Wahb's Muwatta. Now, Ibn Wahb wrote Muwatta, which is different from Malik's Muwatta, an independent work. And then there's a 14 folio fragment that includes chapters on poetry and song from Ibn Wahb's Jami', transmitted by Isa ibn Sakin from Sahnun, from Ibn Wahb. The incipit mentions that it was copied by Abdullah ibn Masrur, and a Samat remarks says that Ibn Masrur heard this from Ibn Miskin in his house in 290. And this is perhaps the earliest datable evidence that scholars' homes were the primary site for learning in this period. And then there is a 26 folio manuscript that contains the chapter on Ilm from the Jami', written by the same copyist, Abdullah ibn Masrur, although otherwise undated. Another major source for Sahnun's Madawana was the Egyptian scholar Ashhab ibn Abdul Aziz. Ashhab's works are also only known through the Kairouan collection, and they include an 18 folio fragment of the Kitab al-Da'wa wal-Bayinat, transmitted by Sahnun's student Yahya ibn Omar al-Kinani. This manuscript is unusual. It's the oldest dated manuscript on Kairouan, although what you're looking at now is actually a parchment bifolio that surrounds the paper on the inside. So this is this very paper that we had just heard about, this Kairouan, locally produced paper. There are also examples of imported paper in Kairouan, but this is that same rough paper that we see in West African manuscripts today. A reader's remark is from 273, well before Yahya ibn Omar's death in 289. And appended to this manuscript is an undated copy of a 36-line letter from Sahnun to Muhammad ibn Ziyad, a judge in Cordoba. The letter appears to have been written during Sahnun's appointment as Qadi of Kairouan, but is the original may be dated to perhaps 234 to 238, although this copy was written centuries later. Several other texts by Ashhab ibn Abdul Aziz are also found in Kairouan, including a 20-folio manuscript of Kitab al-Hajj, which has numerous Samat remarks, the oldest of which is 276, transmitted again through Sahnun. Yahya ibn Omar's name also appears in a manuscript of Abu Zayd Abdurrahman ibn Abi Ghamr's Majalis in a Samat remark from 272. This manuscript is 13 folios long, and Ibn Abi Ghamr was an Egyptian contemporary of Sahnun who died in 234. His text is devoted to auditions from Ibn al-Qasim, who is well known as the main authority for Sahnun's Madawana. The text was taught in the circles of Muhammad ibn Masrur al-Asal, an important scholar who appears many times in various manuscripts of the Kairouan collection. Finally, a 12-folio fragment of one of Yahya ibn Omar's own texts, Kitab al-Hujja fi Rad ala al-Shafi, demonstrates his engagement with the methods of Shafi. It is dated to 271, 18 years before Al-Kinani's death. The collection holds at least one other response to Shafi, whose works were apparently well known in Kairouan, though we have no trace of them today. So I hope this brief survey of some of the Kairouan manuscripts surrounding the life of Sahnun ibn Sa'id gives a sense of the quality and value of this collection, as well as some of the many possibilities for research into its lesser known legal manuscripts. In comparison with Kairouan's sumptuous, expensive Quran manuscripts, these early legal texts are generally written on rough parchment that shows the wear and tear of generations of readers. Precisely why they were kept in the Maqsura of the City Aqba Mosque to begin with is somewhat of a mystery. But the appeals of Muhammad Bayram at the end of the 19th century led to a preservation effort that continues today. As for future generations, their ability to read and study these unparalleled cultural treasures depends on the current work of the staff at the National Library for the Preservation and Conservation of Parchment and Manuscripts in Kairouan. Happily, they are in good hands. The chief cataloger, Afaf Hanouchi, has just defended her PhD on the history of the collection, and the chief conservator and director of the lab, Saleh Mehdi bin Hamouda, depicted here, is currently writing his PhD under the direction of Professor Ibrahim Chebouh, who himself was a past director of the National Library in Tunis and one of the founders of the National Laboratory. Together, their team is undertaking a new inventory of the collection in preparation for a scientifically based catalog. So just a few insights into the lab and some of the amazing work being done on the conservation of these old Quran manuscripts. For example, here is a before picture, and here is one after the conservation. And you can see that they are really working at the highest level to preserve these important texts. The Kairouan Manuscript Project that I represent today is devoted to the care, management, study, and promotion of this collection. In December 2019, we invited 4 members of the staff of the lab to Germany for a week to tour conservation facilities in Hamburg and Berlin. Since then, the Kairouan Manuscript Project, funded by the Center for the Study of Manuscript Cultures at Universität Hamburg, has supported a regular program of training, including a week-long course on conservation in June of 2020 during the pandemic, delivered remotely by Marco Di Bella. As you may know, Tunisia has been devastated by the coronavirus pandemic, and Kairouan has been hit particularly hard. Yet despite all this, work on the laboratory continues. It served as the host of an international conference on manuscripts this past June, and the laboratory has also begun implementing a grant from the Barakat Trust to support 4 conservation interns, fulfilling its ambitions to train the next generation of Tunisian conservators. Currently, there is no reading room nor any dedicated space for those who wish to undertake research on the manuscripts. And it's a major goal of both the laboratory and the Kairouan Manuscript Project to facilitate the work of researchers in the future. Despite the hardships of the present moment, these efforts are gladly undertaken by all who are involved because the knowledge that this collection contains a precious inheritance from scholars, scribes, and artisans who produced these manuscripts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very, very much, Professor Jonathan. Vous avez bien respecté le temps qui vous a été donné. Ça, c'est très, très intéressant.